Well, first of all, welcome to the final session at the West Cork History Festival. My name is Dee Forbes, and I am absolutely thrilled to introduce the final speaker here today. Now, I'm sure he is no stranger to many of you, and the name Francis Urquhart or Frank Underwood are now names that are ingrained in all our minds, but they're synonymous with the political drama and thriller that was House of Cards. It's a great pleasure to welcome Michael here today, and you're going to hear from Michael in a second about what it was that possessed him or inspired him to write House of Cards all those many years ago. And Michael will tell you a lot about himself, but just very briefly, as I was reading up about the man, he spent a lot of time studying in the US and returned back to England to work in London for the Conservative Party. From 1977 to 1979, he was an advisor to Margaret Thatcher, who was then the leader of the opposition. From 81 to 86, he was the Conservative Party Chief of Staff. And from 94 to 95, he served in John Major's government as the Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party. A good background to what he went on to do later. In December 2010, he was made a life peer, and today still sits as a Conservative peer in the House of Lords. But it was back in 1989 that he began to write. And House of Cards was his first book. And it was to be the first in a trilogy of political thrillers with, of course, Francis Urquhart as the central character. House of Cards was followed by How to Play the King and The Final Cut. And if you haven't read those books, they're all for sale in the bookshops around the corner.
Yeah.
In 1990, House of Cards hit the small screen with the BBC in the UK. And I was living in the UK in London at that time. And I still remember the environment into which it was launched and the acclaim and the debate that it generated at that time. It really was, incredible for that time. But then I suppose it was in February of 2013 that Netflix aired the American adaptation of House of Cards. And that has now gone on to its 5th series on Netflix. And I think it's fair to say that House of Cards and Netflix have transformed the way in which drama is now being given to us as an audience. And at the time, Rotten Tomatoes, that great website, declared it as a slick, engrossing drama that may well define how TV is produced. Now, how true they were and how right they were. And with that, can you please give a big West Cork welcome to Michael Dobbs.
Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, and Dee, thank you so much for that warm and wonderful welcome. So much nicer than. Can you hear me all right with this? Yeah. Sounds great. So much nicer than the one I had at another literary history festival just the other week. I was being introduced by a Dutch lady. And she spoke really good English, but we discovered it wasn't quite perfect when she introduced me as being a man who had a lot of experience tucked away beneath his belt. I'd only met her 20 minutes earlier, too. The problems that we poor writers get into. But look, first of all, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being here and helping make this History Festival such a special inaugural deal. It's a brilliant opportunity for me to come here and to enjoy West Cork, and I hope for all of you to be able to enjoy the extraordinary number of fantastic speakers that you've had. So I want to say thank you, and thank you to all the organisers who decided that this madness of putting on a new show, a new centre here in West Cork. So I mean that passionately because I'm almost a local. My family came from Abberleaks, which is, about 150 miles north of here. And I have kissed the Blarney Stone. I have leant over backwards to kiss the stone and watched all of my change fall cascading from my pockets, which I assume is really the object of the exercise. And last night, what a wonderful dinner we had here last night. In this tent, there were 3 English peers on one table which I don't suppose has happened very often here. And we left sober and intact, well, at least intact. Yeah, I'm a member of the House of Lords. I'm not quite sure whether it's disputed whether I was put into the House of Lords for my services to fiction or for my services to the Conservative Party. It's also unclear what the difference is. And as you know, I've never had a proper job. I started off writing advertisements for a living. Then I went on to writing political manifestos. But now I've changed completely, and I just simply write works of fiction. And I was, I've had a very sordid political background. I was with Margaret Thatcher on that first night in 1979 when the election campaign came to its conclusion, and I was the first person. My little chunk of history is being the first person to be able to turn around to her and say, "Margaret, congratulations, you've won." I was the first person to be able to say, "Yes, you are Prime Minister." And I was with her. She took her first steps into Downing Street as Prime Minister, and I was with John Major 18 years later when we were all kicked out. So politics is a full life. You want me to? Fine, okay. And you can still hear me. You can still hear me in all kinds. Great, that's brilliant. Yeah. Politics, which is really what I've come to talk to you about in some way, shape, or form. Politics. You will all know and understand the meaning of the word politics, taken from the ancient Greek. Poly, meaning many, and ticks, meaning tiny blood-sucking insects. I remember the day when they asked me to be the Chief of Staff of the Conservative Party. Now, I was young and naive, and I thought this was the best job a man could ever possibly have. And I rushed round the pub to tell all my friends. I burst in, the doors went flying. I said, "Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? They want me to be the Chief of Staff." And they said, "Chief of Staff? What does that mean?" I said, "I don't know, but isn't it wonderful?" They said, "Have they had a Chief of Staff before?" And I said, "No, this is a brand new job that they've built just for me." So they said, look, before you throw all of your toys out the pram, sit down, have a drink, and we'll figure out some other political chiefs of staff on whom you might model this new job. So we sat down, had a drink or two, and we came up with two other names, two other political chiefs of staff on whom to model this new job. One was Mr. Bob Haldeman, who was Chief of Staff to President Richard Nixon, and they let him out on parole after 3 years of a 7-year sentence. And the other one was Martin Bormann, who was Chief of Staff to Adolf Hitler, and they shot him. So I'm very glad to be able to be with you here this afternoon. I always knew that working for Margaret Thatcher was going to be a tough business. Politics is a tough business. It's not a place to go if you want a nice hug and a cuddle. You're going to have your highs and you're going to have your lows. And it was particularly the case with Margaret Thatcher. President Mitterrand of France, after their first meeting, went back to Paris and told his colleagues, "She's an extraordinary woman. She has the lips of Marilyn Monroe and the eyes of Caligula." And there came a point after I'd been working for her for many, many years, over a decade, where I got those eyes, both barrels. We had this huge, huge row just a week before the 1987 general election, her last one. We had this huge row, and I left on holiday a couple of weeks later to think about my future. I was thinking it was about time that I found something else to do. In fact, Margaret rather insisted on it. And I was deeply upset. I was almost traumatized. I mean, I had been working so hard for so long and so dedicatedly, and then to have that all snatched away. I knew it would happen eventually, but when it happens, it still hurts. And I went down to the swimming pool at the little hotel I was in Gozo, little island just off Malta. I went down there with a pad and a pencil and a bottle of wine. Now, clearly, I was in need of therapy for the circumstances that I'd just been through, but I couldn't afford the therapy, but I had a bottle of wine. So I sat down and I said, can I write a book? Should I write a book about it? I've been asked to write the book of the inside story of the swinging handbag. In other words, all the inside dirt. And I thought, this is just not for me. I mean, I hate those books written by people who've just shared all the confidences and all the secrets of power and then rush straight off to sell them all, sell their friends for to publish it. But I thought maybe there is another type of book that I could be inspired to write. And I was going through this process of mourning, of being bruised and battered, and I sat down there with my bottle of wine. And by the time I'd finished that bottle of wine, all I had on my writing pad were 2 letters. F-U. Clearly, this was a dangerous form of therapy because I'd actually rather liked the process of coming up with this. And I went back the next day with another bottle of wine, and F.U. became Francis Urquhart. That's why he's called Francis Urquhart. And F.U. is his character, too. And I wrote a book based on that very simple concept, which became known as House of Cards, which John Major was kind enough to say had done for his job what Dracula had done for babysitting. And then the BBC got hold of it. I mean, the book was published. It was a great success. And then the BBC got hold of it, and with that wonderful actor, Ian Richardson, made a superb series of House of Cards. But there was a bit of a problem. You may remember that it opens with Ian Richardson as Francis Urquhart looking at a silver-framed photograph of Margaret Thatcher. He's looking at it and he says, "Nothing lasts forever." And he places that photograph face down on his desk. Now, through the coincidences and cock-ups that all broadcasters often have, the BBC managed to put that out in their unwisdom on the very week that Margaret Thatcher was forced to resign and was dragged out of Downing Street, leaving her fingernails on the carpet with tears. As you all remember, there were very powerful images of Margaret leaving Downing Street with tears streaming down her face. The very same week as House of Cards and Nothing Lasts Ever went out. It was cock-up. But everybody thought I was brilliant. And it went on from there to do some truly extraordinary things. Then, must be about 8 years ago, various people in Hollywood had tried to recreate it, to do an American version. And none had quite succeeded. And so I was getting blasé with the promises of Hollywood, and then somebody called me up, didn't know who it was, said, "Hi, Mike." Mike? "Hi, Mike, we love your House of Cards, and we'd love to do an American version." And I thought, look, I've heard this how many times before? So I was very, very blasé about it. And I said, "Fine, come back and talk to me when you've got something really solid to talk about." So I let it go and heard nothing more until 6 months later. The phone rang yet again. "Hi, Mike." They still hadn't learned. "Hi, Mike. We still want to do your House of Cards, and we've got Kevin Spacey and David Fincher involved, the two gods of America, of Hollywood." So Fincher and Spacey. What do you think? And I said, "This is a trick question. I've got to think about this. I mean, these are these people who bestride the cinematic world." And I politely thought about it for about 0.3 of a nanosecond and said, "Sure, let's try it." And as you may know, we are now 5 series later and the 6th in preparation. It is extraordinary. We actually film House of Cards in a little place that some of you might have heard of called Baltimore. Now, not Baltimore here, but Baltimore over there, in a warehouse, in an old warehouse that used to be run by a pharmaceutical company, which is now turned into the most extraordinary production facility out there. At times I can get really wobbly about it because it's almost 30 years ago to the day that I sat beside that swimming pool in Gozo and wrote FU on that piece of paper. And for the last 30 years, House of Cards has sustained me and my family. It has transformed my life and still carries on transforming my life. I'm a very, very fortunate young man. I mean, I know that the title of this talk says that House of Cards wrote itself. It's not entirely true. I've had given it a little nudge along the way. But I keep saying that actually writing political fiction is really quite simple. What you do is you take reality and then you water it down. And you water it down to make it credible. I mean, who could... If I had written a novel about the sort of goings-on that we are witnessing in all parts of the world right now, people say, no, this doesn't happen, this doesn't happen. It does. And you water it down just to make sure that people can get to grips with it. But, you know, political novels, they're more than just... it's not really about politics, you see. If I asked you if any of you had seen the American version of House of Cards, say, and I asked you what happened in Series 3, what bill was Frank working on, what were the issues that he was dealing with, you wouldn't be able to remember. What you would remember are the extraordinary personalities, the clash of personalities that those wonderful characters were engaged in. Because politics really, and the secret of politics really, is about the personalities rather than the individual policies themselves. And you cannot understand, in my view, you cannot understand politics without understanding the personalities behind them. Let me take, for example, Margaret Thatcher. What made her the extraordinary, tough, combative woman that she was? If you go back to her childhood, for instance, she was born in Grantham, and she hated Grantham. She hated her life there, she hated her school, she hated all the patronizing influence of males that she found there, and the submissiveness of so many women. And women who told her that as a woman she shouldn't expect too much, that she would never go to Oxford, that she would never go into politics, and she shouldn't even think about it. And it's extraordinary that if you know anything about Margaret Thatcher, you know that she was in awe of her father, but she never uttered almost any word at any stage about her mother. And she was told by a headmistress, her headmistress at the school, that she should give up her dreams of going to Oxford. And of course she worked twice as hard, she was stubborn, she refused to accept that, and she took great delight later on in going back to that school and deliberately snubbing the headmistress. She was not an easy woman, not necessarily a particularly nice woman, because great leaders, and I do regard Margaret Thatcher as a great historical leader, whether you love her or hate her, and it's possible to do both. I do regard her as a great leader, but great leaders, in my view, are rarely nice, comfortable people. They are driven by something inside them. They are driven, they become almost obsessive about things. And you cannot understand Margaret Thatcher without accepting that extraordinary spring mechanism inside her which just kept her going and going and going when other mere men fell by the wayside. Although one man who didn't fall by the wayside, and is very important to understanding Margaret Thatcher, of course, was Dennis Thatcher. Much ridiculed, much mocked, most unfairly, because actually he was a very decent, honourable man. He was once asked, "Mr. Thatcher, who wears the trousers in your family? He said, I do, of course. He said, I often have to wash and press them too. He did like a drink, well, see, because I remember life, liquor, and lust comes into the title of this talk. She liked her whiskey, but Dennis particularly liked a gin or three. They were once very early one morning, on a VC-10, a Royal Aircraft plane going off to India. And it was 6 o'clock in the morning. And the steward came back and said, morning, Mr. and Mrs. Thatcher, how are you? Can I get you anything to drink? And Margaret said, I'll have a cup of tea, please, thank you very much, yes. And you, Mr. Thatcher, what can I get you to drink? He said, I'll have a gin and tonic, make it a large one. And Margaret said, but Dennis, it's not even breakfast time yet. He says, it's lunchtime where we're going, and I always like to arrive prepared. But there was another quite emotional time when he was talking to me. Not many people know this, but Margaret was the second Mrs. Thatcher. His first marriage had happened during World War II and had broken up behind his back while he was on active service in Italy. And it hurt him greatly, and he rarely talked about it. But astonishingly, her name, the first Mrs. Thatcher, was also named Margaret. And I remember him saying to me once, he said, look, lad, he said, if ever you need to get remarried, always marry a gal with the same name as the first. He said, it'll save an awful lot of bother when you come back slaughtered at 3 o'clock in the morning. But Dennis was a rock. Dennis was a man who understood Margaret. Dennis was a man that she always listened to. And you cannot understand the extraordinary story of Margaret Thatcher without accepting the fundamental role of Dennis in all of that. Because politicians are people, they're flesh and blood like the rest of us. And our personalities and our situations and our personal circumstances, like every other person, affects how it is we are and how it is we do things. Give you another example. Winston Churchill, a man that I've written quite a lot about. 4 novels about Winston Churchill. And I remember when what have I got to offer? Writing a novel about Winston Churchill. He's a man who's been written about probably more than any other Englishman ever. And what can a novel do? Well, a novel can do certain things. Novelists make assumptions, but they kind of read human nature. And they can actually get beyond the written record. And the written record never tells you everything. And for that purpose, I wanted to get to know, we all know the 65-year-old Churchill, the defiant man with a glass of whiskey and a cigar. But what made him that way? Because he was another man who was driven, who was obsessive, who never, ever let go. And I wanted to know what he was like as a child, to see where he came from, those roots. And I went down to his first school. It's in Ascot, St George's in Ascot. Nowadays it's a delightful school for young ladies. In his day, it was run by a chap called the Reverend Herbert Sneed Kinnersley. Winston arrived at the age of 7. He'd been tutored privately up to that point, and it was his first experience of the outside world. And he was dumped there in this boarding school at the age of 7, in the care of the Reverend Herbert Sneed Kinnersley. Now, Sneed Kinnersley was a strange man. He had big mutton chop whiskers that he used to grab when he was shouting at the children. He was an odd man. He used to take all the boys down to then there were about 40 of them in that school. Winston was the youngest. And he used to take them all off to the swimming pool, the swimming pond, rather, in those days. We're talking about the 1880, thereabouts, where he would take off all of his clothes and instruct all the boys to take off all of their clothes, and they would jump into the swimming pond and have a splash about and enjoy themselves. He liked being chased by the boys through the woods on a paper chase. In other words, he probably wasn't the sort of guy who should have been trusted within a million miles of impressionable young boys, but he was also a brutal, brutal man. His idea of an education was pretty primitive even by Victorian standards. It was to break his boys down, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, so that he could rebuild them in his image of young Victorian gentlemen. And Winston was a problem boy. He was always difficult, never easy, always getting into trouble. One day, he was discovered to have stolen a pocketful of sugar from the school pantry. And for that crime, he was taken to the headmaster's study, where he was stripped naked, held down over the beating block by two older boys, where the headmaster thrashed him, and thrashed him, and thrashed him, and thrashed him, and thrashed him, until he wasn't just black and blue and crying in pain. He was thrashed until blood was pouring from the wheals on his body. You see, Sneyd Kinnersley thought he had to break this boy, break him down, and in order to rebuild him, break his resistance. And he almost succeeded. Churchill became a very nervous boy. He developed a nervous stutter and became a very sickly boy. And if you can imagine the course of history, if Churchill had continued with that stutter, when of course he fought at times only with his words, history as we know it would have been very, very different. And he almost broke Winston. It got to the point where Winston went home for a school holiday and was discovered by his nanny to have all these terrible scars and wounds on his back. And the nanny took him to his parents, useless parents, appalling parents, who said, and the nanny said, "You have to take Winston out of this school. It's ruining him." And perhaps the only other thing that they really, really did for Winston, apart from giving birth to him, was actually to make that decision to take him from the school. Because it saved Winston, and it saved, in many ways, it saved the rest of us too. Because if Sneyd Kinnersley had broken Winston Churchill, how could that old man, having been broken, have withstood everything that was thrown at him when he became Prime Minister in 1940, 1941? There was something in him that refused to give in. And that showed itself even as a young boy. Because I haven't finished that story of that Winston at that school. Imagine Winston being taken from the headmaster's study in absolute pain and with his back opened up, put into his dormitory and told, "Stay there until you can rejoin the school community once again." He stayed there. When he came back out, the very next time that Sneyd Kinnersley took the boys down to the swimming pond, Winston sneaked away, sneaked back up to the school, broke into the headmaster's study, and stole from the back of the door the headmaster's prized straw boater. That's the hat that he used for official occasions, for assemblies, to greet parents. And Winston took that straw boater down to the school woods, and for one glorious afternoon, he kicked the crap out of it. Not bad for an 8-year-old boy who had just been so cruelly treated. In other words, Winston wasn't like the rest of us. Me, I'd have put up my hands and said, "Look, fair enough, I'll do anything to stop this, beatings, this abuse." But Winston was abused, and he withstood it. And I think in that understanding of that young boy, you can begin to see why he was such an extraordinary old man, and the sort of man that he was. And when I went to that school to look for the traces of Winston, as I said, it's now a girls' school. I expected to go there and find the Winston Churchill Memorial Wing or the Winston Churchill Library. All they could provide me, after half an hour of searching for it, was a cardboard box filled with bits of paper and old diaries and photographs. And for me, it was a treasure. They were records of Winston and about Winston from his early days. And they opened up all sorts, new sorts of insights into him for me. When I'd finished, and they took great care of me during that day, when I'd finished, they said, "Thank you so much. I'm sorry to have bothered you and taken up so much of your time." And I said, "You must get dozens of people every week like me coming here and asking about Winston at his first school." And the headmistress said, "You know, we haven't had anybody here for 10 years asking after this box, which is why we took so long to find it." And I, as a novelist, had actually done more research on the young Winston than many historians. And that's not having a go at historians. Not all of them would have needed that. But it did strike me as being a little odd that for 10 years, no historian, since his granddaughter, actually, Celia Sands, since none of them had actually gone to that school and discovered that. So I think that novelists, political novels, actually have something to offer beyond the histories. It helps illustrate the personalities and what makes these individuals tick. And what made Winston tick were many things. You know, he took those childhood scars and he turned them into strengths of defiance and of resistance. He did that with the help of liquor. Another part of the title of this talk. Well, actually, Margaret actually enjoyed a nice drop of scotch. There were very few times when she really relaxed, but just occasionally when she did, she would do that with a substantial tumbler of whiskey. But Winston, of course, was notorious for his love of alcohol. What did he say? Alcohol, he said, "I've always taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has ever taken out of me." But by God, it was a damn close run thing at times. Although, you know, I think, it's another thing, I think that he boasted and he bragged about his alcohol intake. I mean, he was like a guy at the rugby club. "Oh, you wouldn't believe that belting that I had last night." He was from that sort of era and that sort of background. But I don't think it was as simple as that. I mentioned that he was a troubled child. He was a difficult child. He had a terrible time at his school. I personally believe that he was suffering from something like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, nowadays we fill kids with that with Ritalin. He didn't have that. And I think that the alcohol, which he started drinking at breakfast time and throughout the day, I think that his form of self-medication to even out the mood swings and the highs and lows of his problem. So even his drinking, you can't be taken for granted, and tells a story about him. But he did love his alcohol. There's a wonderful story about him and Lady Astor. Now, Lady Astor was the first woman to have sat in the British House of Commons. I believe that there was an Irish lady who was elected, but refused on principle to sit there. She was the first. She was American. You see, we don't take against people just because they don't happen to be British. Americans, Irish, they're all welcome, you know. And she was of the same party as Winston, but rarely of the same persuasion. They fought like cats and dogs their entire lives. She, for instance, was a woman who said, "Winston, if you're my husband, I would poison your coffee." He said, "Madam, if you were my wife, I would drink it." But the occasion I'm thinking of is when they went together into the Guildhall in the City of London, side by side. And she said, "Winston, look around you. You could fill half of Guildhall with all the brandy that you've drunk in your life." And the old man looked around him. He said, "Yes," he said. "Yes. There's so much more still to do and so little time to do it." Which is, as I was taken as my motto in politics, so much more to do and so little time to do it. But great leaders are very rarely nice people. In fact, I can't think of any great leader who is just a nice, comfortable person. They're often uncomfortable to be with. They are driven, they're obsessive. That's because in many cases they they have their own internal difficulties dealing with themselves. They are driven, they are passionate about things, which is one of the reasons why you shouldn't be surprised that so many politicians end up with problems of sex scandals. I mean, how can you expect a politician who is so passionate and driven on the public stage to then go back home and just be like a mouse? Very few of them are. And as they say, you know, when a politician marries his mistress, it only creates a job vacancy. But there is, so very often you find that people, great people in public life, are out on the public stage to compensate for the inadequacies or the challenges in their own private lives. They're trying to make up for things on the public stage which they cannot achieve inside. So they're not comfortable people. They're often tormented and fragmented people. So why do we try to insist that politicians should all be choir boys, innocents? Doesn't work in my book, or in my books. The idea that somebody should be in a position of authority and not allowed to make any mistake, ever having allowed to make any mistakes, because nowadays that we sort of say one strike and you're out. I don't think washes. Most of those great people have made many mistakes, but the thing is that they have learned from those mistakes, like, for instance, Churchill did. And I think, you know, writing about politicians in the way that I do, works of fiction, it makes me feel that actually we are often too hard in reality of them, and we've lost confidence in ourselves. I kind of think that, you know, in our modern world, we are, particularly in our countries, we're like the man who's bent over looking at his untied shoelaces. Of course we've got problems, there's no denying that, but we seem to fixate so much on our problems that we forget so many of the good things that we've achieved. And when we're bent over with our backside stuck in the air, it's not surprising that people take advantage of us, as happens so frequently in this world today. I just wish we could find a little more self-respect and sense of what our values mean to us, because those values are deep and enduring, unlike so many policies and the bits of politics. And for me, I'm not going to bore you with my views about the European Union, but I think that is also part of the problem. The idea that we have to all do things in the same way, and there is only one way of doing it. Now, my view of Europe is a bit like this. Imagine you're in a railway carriage, and opposite you come and sit a young couple. And how can I mention such things in this polite company, but imagine they start having sex. Now, if you're a Frenchman, you will start applauding. If you're a German, you will sit and take detailed statistical analyses. If you're an Italian, you will get up and join in. If you're a Greek, you will sell tickets. If you're an Irishman, you will probably dance a jig. But if you're an Englishman, you will sit and stare stoically out of the window as if absolutely nothing was going on. But if you're from Brussels, of course, you would open up a big manual to make sure that they were doing it right. I love the confusion of cultures and values that we have in Europe, and I sometimes think that we forget that. And I think there's a little moral in the story of House of Cards in all of this, because House of Cards is nowadays truly global. It really stretches around the world. We have the technology nowadays to press a button and it goes throughout the world. And that's a hugely powerful tool that we don't always understand. I mean, I've had conversations with President Xi of China about House of Cards, with Obama. President Obama used to tweet about it. David Cameron used to chillax to it. Prime Minister Renzi of Italy was once spotted going into a bookshop in Rome and coming out with a copy, got a photograph of it. I thought, I ought to write to him. And I said, sir, I noticed that you got a copy of my book. I hope that you will thoroughly enjoy it. I said, but please remember, it is a work of entertainment, not a work of instruction. And the Prime Minister of Kazakhstan, on an official visit to Britain, asked to see me to tell me how much he liked the book, and he gave me his own official copy of House of Cards, dedicated it to me. And I thought this was a little strange, and it was a copy in Russian, of course, from Kazakhstan. And as he gave it to me, and I smiled, and I said, "Thank you so much," I suddenly realised I had never signed a Russian publishing deal. But he then asked me to take a selfie with him so that he could send it back home to his kids. I mean, it's extraordinary how far the House of Cards has gotten. I'm not claiming credit for this. It just happens to have been in the right place at the right time, and now is the right time. In television terms, we are in a golden age of television. When 1,000 channels of telly became available, I think a lot of people thought it would be 1,000 channels of wallpaper. But it's been quite the reverse. It's been, what we have told the broadcasters is that we want quality. And we're willing to pay for it, and we're willing to be patient for it, and the quality of television production around the world is getting better and better and better, and it has never been a better time to be a television viewer than today. And it's a very, very powerful tool, and I don't think yet we really understand just how powerful. I mentioned all of those people, Xi, Obama, Cameron, Renzi, the Prime Minister of Kazakhstan. Astonishingly, it's a reflection on politics, that they were all in power 2 years ago, and now none of them are left, except for President Xi of China. Politics is so extraordinarily uncertain, so volatile. But what that technology does for us is it enables us to communicate our values, the values that we have. And wonderfully, we live in the part of the world that's called the West, and frankly, it's our values which most people around the world seem to want. Our television programs, our plays, our books. There's much more traffic from our part of the world over to other parts than there is in the other direction. And the power of storytelling is just so important to societies. The power of imagination. It's a vital part of what it is we are and who it is we're about. It's a vital part of lifting our sights and lifting our ambitions. And that's more important than ever right now. Look, I'm an optimist. I have to be. I've got 4 kids. I'm also a realist. I have to be. I've got 4 kids. But, we as a society really haven't treated this new generation very well at all. I'm talking about, we've all talked about baby boomers and millennials, but I'm talking about post-millennials. I mean, those young kids that are now young adults, they've got the vote, they are into university, and they are the future. And yet, what have we? When I say we, I mean those of us of my generation. What have we done for them? Their first memory was probably the attack on the Twin Towers. We followed that up with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Then we created for them that financial chaos, crisis that still hangs over us all. And they have never known a world without a war on terror, without uncertainty, without low expectations, without all those selfies of Kim Kardashian's bum. I mean, is it not a surprise that these kids they have different values? They have lower expectations. They think that the world out there offers them nothing but chaos and uncertainty. And I think that we owe them more than that. I think that we need to raise their sights and make them realize that there's much more that is available. And we have to play a part in delivering that. And perhaps this is what this festival is really all about. We are going through a particularly difficult time right now, but when you look back, have been all sorts of other ages when we have gone through difficult times, sometimes much more difficult than this one. I had the huge fortune just before Christmas to be in Dublin with my dear friend David Putnam and his wife, and my dear wife too. I was taken to the library of Trinity College Dublin, and I had two wonderful experiences there, not only to be in that extraordinary place, but they let me look at an first edition, an original copy of Machiavelli's The Prince, the author of House of Cards, looking at Machiavelli's The Prince. That was special. But what was even more special, as you came into the library, there was an original copy of the poster from the 1916 uprising. Hugely powerful. And it got me thinking about all of those young men, those ambitious men who were willing to risk everything and often gave everything for what they believed in. Thank goodness we've come a long, long way since then. But without their ambition and without their aspiration, we wouldn't be where we are today. We wouldn't have made all that progress. And I think this is what the festival, this history festival, is really all about. It's enabling us to get a broader perspective than just the day-to-day. It's enabled us to indulge in our hobbies and our passions and our dreams, and to teach us. And we've had some fantastic talks here over the last couple of days. It raises our aspirations and it offers us inspiration while it gives us information, and you know, that is a huge part of the joy of this. So I want to thank Simon and everybody else who has put on this very first West Cork History Festival, maybe at the first of many. Can I come back and celebrate the 50th of these? So thank you very much for that. We live in a difficult, troubled world, yes, for sure. But some people look at the realities and they follow their fear. Others look at the possibilities and follow their dreams. So may your dreams go with you. Thank you very much. Wow, he's gone on, hasn't he? My goodness me, I do apologise.
Michael has kindly agreed to take a couple of questions. So I'm going to start over here with.
Michael, hi, that was fantastic. You started and gave us a great illustration of great heroic characters and character as history, or history as character. But getting back to House of Cards, I'm just intrigued. Did you think about putting anybody heroic in a positive way into House of Cards?
No, not into House of Cards. Look, I told you, I wrote it by accident. I had no intention of becoming a writer. I had, actually, frankly, I had no intention of finishing it. I didn't know that I would finish it, let alone publishing it. And it all took me rather by surprise. It was one of life's great cock-ups, and you know, I'm very, very happy to have followed it. No, it really was a form of therapy from a bruised and battered fellow. I've written other books about much more heroic and sensible people than Francis Urquhart. You know, none of them has been quite so successful. So, so I blame that all on you, not me.
There are many political slogans that have caught fire. One thinks perhaps of Labour isn't working in 1979, and in our own country we've had a lot done, more to do. Others, instead of catching fire, have gone down in flames, like, for example, strong and stable leadership.
Yes.
Do you think that Theresa May shows qualities of leadership that you saw in Margaret Thatcher?
Oh. Sir, where did you come from? No, it's a perfectly valid question. Let me just first of all dissemble. Let me first of all deal with those slogans. Look, slogans come and slogans go. One or two really do strike home. For instance, Labour isn't working. So much money is wasted on political advertising. And as deputy chairman of Saatchi & Saatchi, I wasted a great deal of money on behalf of the Conservative Party on political advertising because a lot of it simply doesn't work. But where it does work, it catches a moment, it catches a mood. Normally, it takes things that are already there inside you and just brings them front of mind and makes them grow. It's very bad at changing people's view. In fact, it's almost useless at changing people's view. The view has to be there in the first place. And that was the case with Labour isn't working. People understood it immediately. It didn't need any explanation, just 3 words. As far as Theresa is concerned, it's always difficult in politics, because politics is rough. She's a friend of mine. I mean, I've got a great deal of time for her. But history, I think, will probably be very unkind to her. That election, which was called and then thrown away, is going to be an exceedingly difficult one to live down. She does have some of the characteristics of Margaret Thatcher. She is tough. She is determined. But whether she will manage to be in office in, was it 11 and a half years that Margaret lasted? Well, I'll leave that for you. You might say that. You can possibly comment. So we'll pass on to another question at that point. Thank you. Right, thank you.
Thanks. Michael, that was wonderful, very intriguing. You've charmingly and self-deprecatingly described all of your progress as accidental, being in the right place at the right time, taking reality and watering it down, and that's how you created these works of fiction. It seems to me that the truth is that what you did was to take human characteristics and refine them and put them into characters and individuals and expose them in a way that it is not accidental that House of Cards is such a universal success, because we all recognize fragments of ourselves in these characters, the good and the bad and the rest of it. Isn't the truth revealed by your great interest in exploring strong characters that in fact was what you were doing, a distilled essence of an individual and then developing a wonderful and unforgettable character from it?
Well, that's very kind of you, and very interesting that you should put it in that way. Drama is usually best when it explores difficult areas. That's what we're intrigued by. And that means putting people under pressure, taking them to the dark places inside them, putting them under pressure, because that is when we reveal really what sort of people we are. That's one of the reasons why I spent a long time talking about Winston Churchill and the dark places inside him, those memories that he carried with him for his entire life. And that's what makes great drama. I mean, I'm very fortunate to be the author of House of Cards, but in a way, I sort of stole it from Shakespeare. I remember as a 15-year-old kid sitting down to do O-level, and they said, here's your prepared text. It was Shakespeare. Shakespeare. I thought, oh, God, this is going to be so dull. And they gave us Julius Caesar. And I read this story about the most powerful man in the world, who was hacked, stabbed, chopped to death on the steps of his own capital by his best mates. And I thought, it always intrigued me. How does this come about, that you have power and yet you have vulnerability? You know, there is never any sense of stability. There is never any norm in all of this. And I think that is a really important part of writing, particularly political characters. Politics isn't easy. If it were easy, we wouldn't need it. If it were easy, we'd all do it. But politics is about taking those really tough decisions when sometimes there's no right and wrong. There's just two different types of wrong. And it really is. And Churchill very often used to just simply sign off the memos that were sent to him, the policy papers that were sent to him, at the really difficult times with 3 initials, KBO. It meant that he didn't know what the answer was, and his instruction was keep buggering on. And that sometimes is all that politicians can do. So it is a great fertile field for dramatists, that sort of uncertainty. It's why we go into relationships and we look at relationships that are fragmenting, that why war films are so extraordinary if they're really well done, because these are real people that we identify with. That's one of the reasons why I think that Shakespeare was so wonderful, because he taught us about engaging the audience. Richard III turned around and he talks to the audience, and as FU turns around and talks to the audience, and he engages us. We are part of his conspiracy. We accept that, and actually we're then urging him on. We want him to do more, because we are now his chums in a way, even though he's an utter creep. He's awful. But as they say, that politics is the world's second oldest profession, which takes most of its rules from the first. And it's been around a long time, and I suspect it will carry on being around for a very long time too.
We've got time for another 2 questions.
I was just wondering, who do you think is writing the script behind President Trump at the moment? And in regards to fiction, it's quite worrying that this is a reality in today's world. And what do you think about it?
There is a script? Wow. But I tell you, in my world of TV and films and things like that, it's heavily dominated by Democrats, East Coast, West Coast, and they, of course, are utterly hysterical. They hate Trump. And I keep trying to explain to them, it's all very well you hating Trump, and I can understand that. But simply sitting there screaming at him, saying you're hateful, you're hateful, you're hateful, just plays into his hands. What you have to do is to understand what put Trump there in the first place, and deal with that, because unless you can deal with that, you're going to go nowhere. You're just going to be on the sidelines screaming and shouting. And I tell you what turned it for me about Donald Trump. He's not a politician at all. He shows no characteristics of being a politician in any way that most of us can understand. But I was, during the course of the presidential campaign, I was coming out of, in fact, I just had tea with David in Manhattan, and I was going out to JFK, and I was being driven by a black cab driver, a typical yellow cab, and I won't try and do his accent or the profanity that he was using with me. But I said, tell me, how's it going? What's going to happen? And he said, it's Trump. I said, what? Explain this to me. He said, I and all of my mates are voting Trump. I said, why? And he said, because I'm working in America, and I'm working as hard as I've ever done just simply to try to maintain where I was 20 years ago. I said, we have been screwed by the system, and we have watched others who have been screwing the system and creaming it off the top. And I said, this is our chance, he said. This is our chance to screw that system that is keeping us down and has almost crushed us. I went back home, and he was very passionate about it and very eloquent. I went back home, and I asked my son, who handles all these matters for me, I said, what are the odds, the betting odds, against Trump? And he said, he came back and he said, they're 4-1 against. And I said, I thought really carefully about that black cab driver, and I said, if black cab drivers in New York are saying they're voting Trump, he and all his friends are voting Trump, this isn't 4-1 against. It might be 2-1 against, but it's not 4-1 against. And so I put money on Trump. So thank you, Donald.
We had a question over there, I think.
Thanks very much, Michael. Just want to ask you, you mentioned leaders being, fragmented or having various issues. Would you add adjectives like sociopathic or psychopathic to that list of what it takes to get to the top?
Oh, sociopathic, psychopathic. No, it's not necessary to get to the top, but sometimes it helps. But this is why I keep going on about Western values because at the heart of it, it's democracy. It's treating others with respect in a way that we don't get a chance in the rest of the world to do. One of my colleagues in the House of Lords, I got up after the American election. I said, look, let's remember, and everybody was in the chamber was having a go at Trump. Trump, I hate him, he's useless, it's awful. I said, look, remember that this is a triumph of democracy, that we could hand over the leadership of the most powerful nation on earth peacefully and legally. And that is a privilege which most of the rest of the world simply can't understand and would give their eye teeth for. And I had a colleague, friend who bustled out, doesn't sit on our benches, bustled out of the chamber, made a beeline for me, and she grabbed me and said, and you forgive the language, but she said, "You are so full of shit, Michael." I thought, wow, I think she's missed the point. Because the point is not that democracy always produces the right answer. It doesn't, but it always has the ability at another stage to produce a better answer than we've got. And that's why I think we should actually give ourselves a bit of a pat on the back occasionally and say, for all of the present troubles, we are so much better off than other people in the world. And the Berlin Wall, I met is Jörg here today? I met him last night. Possibly not. We were having a talk about Germany. And I once spent, when I was in my teens, I spent quite a long time in Berlin at the time that the wall was there. It was ugly. It was utterly obscene. It was the spiritual heart of that Cold War. And if you remember that the Cold War, which brought us to the brink, anybody who was around in 1963 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1961, I beg your pardon, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, will remember that you're going to bed and thinking, my God, we might not get up in the morning. That wall wasn't blasted down. It was pulled down by the hands of millions of ordinary people who wanted what we had. Not just the economic stuff, yes, there's that too, but the values, the ability to be able to change our minds, to discuss, to actually have our own beliefs. And they pulled that wall down with their own bare hands because we had faith in our values. And I think if we could just rekindle some of that faith in our own values and go on improving them and enhancing them, we would be in a much better position than we seem to be today. And we would still be that sort of that torch, that beacon that other people around the world so much want.
Michael, thank you. That's perhaps a suitably inspiring note on which to conclude. Thank you for coming. Michael, as you may or may not know, got back from the West Coast to London on Thursday.
Was it Thursday? I've lost track of days. Yes, it was Thursday.
And instead of staying there and going to bed, promptly got on another plane and came here. So
why would a man not come here?
Well, you're in your debt.
Thank you very much. Can I go home now?
It's a very difficult act to follow, so I shan't attempt to do it, except briefly to thank all of you and to say a few thank yous to the people who made the festival possible. Starting with Victoria, who has sort of first accommodated and then facilitated this crazy idea of having a first West Cork History Festival. Both of our sets of parents, Victoria's parents, have unfortunately had to return to Kent, but they were enormously important, and Peter, in particular, standing as a stalwart in the Secret Garden, did excellent work. All of the committee members, I won't name all of them. Some of our critics have described them as the secretive organising committee. In fact, the names are all on the website, and you probably know most of them and where they live, should you wish to. I'd like to thank all of the local people, the Skibbereen District Historical Society, whose journal we launched yesterday, the bookshop owners, plural, of Skibbereen, Holger, Smythe, Cathal O'Donovan. They have supported us from the outset. They've created a fantastic book marquee, which is still open and still functioning, should you wish to go there to buy books by Lord Dobbs or indeed anybody else that you might choose. the people who provided our food, the people who at the Skibbereen Arts Festival, and Brendan McCarthy standing at the back in a T-shirt, allowed us to attach ourselves limpet-like to the side of an existing and really estimable festival, which will continue for another week, should you wish to remain. I know you might wish to leave other things, but you could remain in this sense. And the providers of both food and drink externally, Fanula Harkin, who ran the thing that isn't a bar, for the purposes of license. You buy admission to that salon, and the alcohol is an entirely secondary and separate matter. And to the team that made it all happen, and several of them, and the one in the red cap is perhaps the most significant. That is my brother Timothy. Who was born on my 3rd birthday, and brought the practical ability to go with the gob that had come into the world 3 years previously. Thank you, and thank you to all of the others who have made it possible. David Clark down there, who helped with the communications from the outset. So the question, I suppose, is, should we do it again? This was the first one. And I'll take that as a qualified yes. We had a fantastic weekend. Roy Foster began offering us the possibility of plurality in the way in which we remember things. And that the themes that he sketched on Friday, it seems to me, have run all the way through to Michael and the stirring words that we've had at the end of it. But if I'd said a year ago when we were thinking about this, that we'll have a festival in the rebel county in which one fellow will say neither Collins, Boland, nor De Valera were Republicans, and another fellow will spend 20 minutes eulogizing Margaret Thatcher. I think you might have suggested that the location was wrong, but they didn't. Elizabeth Bowen, who was a great Cork woman, not a West Cork woman, a Cork woman, once described going to a reading by Ezra Pound in London, and she said it was hypnotically unintelligible. And there is an hypnotically unintelligible quality about all history, but perhaps particularly Irish history. We've encountered some of that this weekend, but begun perhaps to pick a way towards thinking about it in different ways. I think we will try and do it again. In the meantime, thank you to all of you and everybody else who's come, and go and enjoy what appears to be a late burst of sunshine. And as you do so, you will almost certainly have to pass into the grounds of Lissard Estate, who are our neighbours, where most of you have parked, more or less legally. They have been extraordinarily tolerant, both of our parking and of my relentless requests for support. So we should thank our neighbours too. So that's quite enough from me. Slán agus badna cliv go léir.